everybody, my name is Eric Tennant. I'll be talking to you guys tonight about a company called, an organization called World Relief. They're a nonprofit organization. Their mission is to empower the local church to serve the most vulnerable. So that means a couple things. They're an evangelical organization. So they're essentially an organization of missionaries traveling throughout the world, serving people who are struck by natural disaster, human disaster, drought, starvation, things like that. Globally, they take part in disaster response, health and child development, refugee and immigration services, economic development, and peace building. And again, that's spread across the world wherever the issues demand certain need. In America, the biggest way we can help is through refugee resettlement immigration services. I chose to do this report on World Relief because I have personal experience with them. After I graduated from high school, I moved down to Nashville for about 4 months and spent time working in the warehouse for the World Relief office there. It was me and 2 other guys. We would collect donations, much like St. Vinny's does, go out collecting from throughout town, and then use what the donations we collected to set up the apartments for the refugees coming in. They would live together in apartment complexes, and we would provide them furniture, kitchenware, all the essentials like that. For their performance, based on 2014, their revenue was primarily from grants and loans, about 70%, with 20% being contributions, 4% from investments, and 6% elsewhere from fundraising, that sort of thing. Over a span of about 5 years, we see that the government grants gradually go up, and the total revenue for 2014 was about $61 million. So 70% of that being grants and 20% the private contributions, which the grants we see rising, I think we could say is correlation to the dropping level of private contributions that we see over the 5 years. They need to supplement that income elsewhere. In 2010, the total revenue was about $57 million. So their total revenue has gone up steadily over these 5 years, but only a few million. Their expenses, about 50 to 60% of their total revenue is spent outside the U.S. on all of those child and health development, all those things. In the U.S., the expenses are broken down primarily towards salaries and related things for employees, and another 38% split between the initial refugee grants and the other grants and other specified help. The initial refugee grants make up about 16% of their expenditures, and that could be towards the housing, like renting the apartments for the refugees, providing any education, any legal fees, stuff like that. And the same would be applied to the other grants. Those are just the public grants, while 16% would be federal grants. Here we can see that over the 5 years, it's mainly been salaries and related expenses going up. Everything else seems to stay pretty steady. So that few million increase that we saw over the 5 years in revenue, I think we can obviously say is being implemented into higher salaries for employees, which is good because from my experience working there, employees aren't paid very much for the aspect of helping the people they're there to serve. So they suffer through a low wage to do that. Looking at their strategies, they focus a lot on relationship marketing. To an extent, it's implied that the refugees will stay with them and not look for another service provider. And we'll look into that a little bit. Otherwise, the way World Relief houses, educates, and responds to the refugees with issues that they have are all ways that they try to build the relationship to better improve the service. In in 1975, World Relief became the first evangelical organization allowed to resettle refugees in America. So with this, there's only a few other alternatives for them. So they're kind of, it's not likely that they're going to jump to, say, a different organization. World Relief isn't doing it for me. I want somebody else to help me live in this new country. They're kind of stuck with who they get initially when they come in to the U.S. World Relief, being evangelical, has a very clear set of goals, a very clear purpose for why they're doing what they're doing. So that helps the refugees realize that how much they're dedicated. Last bullet point, dedicated support. The staff there is there for the refugees, not for any other reason. So they're very dedicated to serving them. The way they house the refugees when they come into America, first off, it's decided which city they'll go to. There are maybe 15 to 20 offices in cities across America. So once that's decided, they're brought to apartment complexes where they're placed with people of similar culture or ethnic backgrounds. If a family from Burma comes fleeing from whatever from that country, they'll be placed with other Burmese families neighbored in the apartments. If a Buddhist man comes, he'll be placed around other Buddhist people. And it seems like it could become segregated that way, but in the end it's very beneficial for the refugees to have some resemblance of the culture that they're used to when they're surrounded by a culture that they're not used to at all everywhere else. And within the apartments, if, say, a family of 5 comes with 3 young kids, this was mainly the job that I had when I was working there. We would bring colored pencils and coloring books and a large couch with a couple extra chairs to suit the needs, because that family needs it more than, say, a single male coming in. He'd probably get just a love seat and Catcher in the Rye, rather than some big children's books that go to the children. Next, the education. Some education is provided by World Relief. They teach, basics on getting jobs, a lot of language, English, because the refugees, most of them don't speak English, obviously. And unfortunately, it's a very small percentage of the refugees that take advantage of the classes offered by World Relief. I'm not sure on the exact number, but I'd say well below 50%. But this means that there's still a varied number of classes, and they're spread throughout the week, so the few number of refugees taking classes are able to have groups of 5 or 6 for one teacher, which helps the learning process tremendously. Their responsiveness, the offices that World Relief operates out of are always placed close to the apartment complexes that the refugees are being settled in, so that if there's ever an issue, World Relief staff can respond quickly, be there in a matter of minutes. And it even extends beyond their office hours. If they're not in the office, they'll still respond. They'll always have somebody to respond to an issue that a refugee has, to the point where some staff even go to live in the apartment complexes 2 doors down from the refugees, to be there on the spot when they need help. And many of the refugees that do that, I noticed when I was in Nashville, were ones that took advantage of the education that was provided by World Relief, and they were able to advance, and with loans and whatnot, they were able to take college classes and graduate with degrees, and they became employees of World Relief. So by offering education, World Relief ends up building an employee base, and one that, from the hospitality that they were shown, is just as willing to show as much courtesy. And for my recommendations, only here. Primarily the funding. We saw on the expenses, or on the revenue rather, it was mainly grants and increasing over the past few years. So I suggested that they start reaching out more for private donors, so that they can get more income, and that income would be best used for benefits for employees. When I was doing my research, most of the, on various websites with nonprofit organization reviews, most of the World Relief comments were about how there wasn't very much human resources in individual city offices across the U.S. It was mainly in their home office in Baltimore that human resources was. So in the job they go through, it's not as expected as you would think, but they go through a lot of traumatic experiences dealing with the refugees. Similar services are offered to the refugees because they obviously have struggled through a lot, and counseling, things like that is important for them, but the World Relief employees also would benefit from a similar service. So I think that would be where the money would be best put. And this could be done by my next recommendation. Building partnerships would allow primarily a wider variety of employment options for the refugees. Mainly now, World Relief would help refugees through their connections with local churches and things like that, and the refugees could be maintenance or like clean churches. But if they were to go beyond that and kind of go outside religious partnerships, because their main partners are always churches, say with a grocery store, they could provide an opportunity for refugees to work at that grocery store and be surrounded by more of American culture, and working with a lot of people that speak English would help them. Being surrounded by it would help them cope with it. And through those partnerships, if it were to be, say, a university like this and a refugee was hired to be a janitor, they'd be working for the university and potentially then get even further reduction in cost or prices beyond what their grants would cover. So they would get more or cheaper resources from the partnerships. And if you want to get involved, these are all the locations of World Relief offices throughout America. Fortunately, there's none in Michigan. There's a few in Wisconsin around Milwaukee. Looks like 3 in Chicago. This green one is in Arrive Ministries, which is just an affiliated church that helps settle the refugees. So yeah, if you're ever in one of those areas, go out and meet some people in need. That's all I got for you guys. Any questions?
Do you think they would, do you think you'd get more donations if it wasn't affiliated with the church? Like maybe if they played the religious aspect less, they would get more private donors? I know people are like super specific about religious views, you know, like if I'm an evangelical, am I going to donate to Protestant or whatever, you know?
That's a fair point. I think you're right. I think if going outside of their religious affiliations, if they tried to reach out on more of a support level rather than religious affiliation.
Like instead of doing it like for God, it's for like
right,
it's for humanity or something.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. If they strayed away from that, they would be able to get more people interested and have further discussions with people. Then a lot of people would be turned off sooner if they were to hear and we're doing this as a church, and some people don't like that.
Well, and maybe to take that a step or two further, are there any partnerships that they have? I thought you mentioned earlier in terms of their, go back to the funding, your bar graphs.
The expenses are
Revenue. So the private contributions are individuals, they're not corporations?
They could be a variety. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay, and just, since we're on this one, just another thought, what's MED banking revenue represent?
That's their investment. That's
Okay,
how they
okay.
had it listed on their financials.
Okay, okay. But I mean, if they had, let's say, certain corporate partners, that might be a way to mediate the concerns or the issue that Tim raises in terms of, let's say, some potential donors that might be reluctant if it's, you know, one set of religious beliefs. But if it's a bigger umbrella, let's say, of a lot of corporations that have partnered with World Relief. I think World Relief has been around for a long time, hasn't it?
Yes, since 50s or 60s.
Well, and I remember the name. I mean, even as a child, I remember the name being advertised on public service announcements. So it's been around a long time. I wonder if there's been any thought of even going beyond, let's say, partnering with corporations to partner with other nonprofits, religious or whatever, you know, to build even another organization, or, you know, where it would be a broader group.
Yeah. Was there a question in there?
Well, I guess, has there been any thought in doing that, or are there major corporate donors? Do you know of?
Not that I know of. I know most of their private contributions are from individuals.
Okay.
I don't recall ever hearing about any corporations being specifically affiliated with them from my time working with their over there.
Okay. I think there was a hand up over here.
Yeah, one of the recommendations was focus on more private funding. Did you give any thought as to maybe some strategies for increasing private funding?
I did. I think I'm drawing a blank on how I expanded on that.
Like print or digital media or celebrity endorsement?
Another one of my recommendations was updating their website. That it was kind of lacking a lot, and I mentioned stuff about advertising for volunteers specifically, but that could go further than volunteers and asking for donations. Even on their website, they don't immediately have a click here to donate part. So adding something like that, or advertisements through social media, things like that. I think we've definitely drawn some donations.
I think you and I talked about this, Tim, but when you look at a nonprofit that's a service provider, it's even more complex and challenging in many respects than a normal for-profit service provider, because you have kind of donors and then you have clients. And the nonprofit has to focus on both of them and have to have, I think, strategies for both of them in terms of how to, you know, generate more funds, let's say from the donor side. Again, if you go back to the bar chart, was it governmental growth? Was that the one that was growing?
Yeah, government public grants.
Okay, so even with those, I mean, when you say public grants, if it's nonprofit foundations, there still has to be a strategy in securing the relationships. You know, if it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or whatever it is, you know, in terms of securing that stream. And then, you know, I don't want to say it's the opposite, but it's completely different when you look at a strategy for the clients, and in this case, you know, they're refugees. So let's talk about the refugee side of this for a few minutes here. So if you go to your service marketing application slide or slides, so these are all focused on the client side of the equation, right?
Right.
Yeah. So can you give us a sense of how this process works? So let's say,
Incoming refugees?
yeah, let's say I'm somebody in some other part of the world and I want to leave and come to the United States.
Primarily, you would have to deal with the UN, the United Nations. You submit a request to them, and they determine if your situation validates refugee status.
Okay.
If so, they select a country for you to go to, actually based on religion, the reason why you're fleeing, if it's natural disaster or political,
Asylum.
right, if you would, the places you go could vary. So once that's decided, the refugees chosen to come to America, arrive on our shores, and from there, the government decides between 9 different nonprofit organizations where each of the refugees will go. So
World Relief is one of the 9.
exactly.
Just out of curiosity, do you know the other 8 or some of the other 8 as
I don't.
examples?
I
Okay.
don't know anyone. From there, World Relief determines which city across America is the refugees would be best suited for.
Okay.
And that would be based on, like, if there's a large Burmese population in Nashville, then most of the Burmese refugees are going to go there rather than those from Cambodia going to Baltimore, Atlanta, wherever else. Once they're in the hands of World Relief, coming into each individual city, that's when they're brought directly to their apartments, shown their houses, and from there they're given, I think, a day or 2 maybe to like settle in, and then they get going on more paperwork, that kind of thing. And that process could take, much paperwork has been done at this point, but additional work for education, housing, those kinds of things could take another couple weeks.
So then what, keep going. So then what happens, let's say, so I'm a refugee, I'm working with World Relief, I'm in Minneapolis or whatever. What happens next?
Well, World Relief will, like I mentioned, they'll offer some classes. They also offer a lot of job placement assistance. So they'll work with churches, and they have some affiliations that they can get jobs with, mainly churches, but they'll also provide skills for refugees. Say a refugee comes in knowing English already, they have a much better chance of getting a job out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll provide help for like building resumes or mock interviews, those kinds of things. So once the family is situated, most of them are families, most of them kids, so it's the mom staying at home with the kids and the father working. If it's something like political unrest or human disaster going on, acts of terror, after a certain amount of time has passed, depending on the situation, they have the option of returning to their home country, or they can stay.
Okay.
Many of them choose to return because once the tragedy is taken care of or it's passed on, they want to return to their homes where their families. But many of them, especially ones who have gone on to get educated, get degrees, and work themselves to high positions and jobs, choose to stay, obviously, to keep doing that.
Okay.
For the job placement, are most of them unskilled labor? I mean, what about refugees that come with skills, not just learning English, but like doctors and lawyers and architects can be displaced by natural disasters and something else?
That's very true, and that there are a lot who do that. Unfortunately, them getting positions based on those kinds of skills aren't very likely. A lot of them do come from very undeveloped areas, especially if people are suffering from natural disaster. It could hit, say, the east coast of Africa, where there's not much development, but these people still can't live even in their undeveloped cities. There's not much. So because most of the refugees are coming from that situation, there's not a huge amount of situations like having training for a doctor, things like that. But the few that do, unfortunately, don't see the benefits from that.
So how does World Relief define success?
I think they would define it by the perspective of the refugee. If the refugee feels that their needs are met, that they're safe, that they're able to cope with their issues, I think that would be the main points. The main point is the satisfaction of the refugee with their comfort of living. Beyond that,
Is there any attempt to measure that?
there's another one of my recommendations written in our report was about feedback. They don't have much feedback systems, so
Okay.
there's not a lot to, other than personal interaction, there's not a lot to base strategic moves off. It's mainly based on what they see in person. Yes.
So this may be irrelevant, but what about citizenship? For those who do stay, like, is it covered by the organization, or how do they handle those situations where they, like, want to stay, but clearly you have to?
When it comes
I don't know if you
time
touched
to that
base on
decision, the refugees have to apply for it,
Okay,
and World Relief will help them with that process.
so
help
do
them
they cover, like, fees and stuff like that, or?
They, I believe for citizenship, they would help cover fees
Okay.
through the like federal grants and
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Would you ever worry about, like, because there's like so much anti-immigration rhetoric now, and like, would you ever worry about any, like, so say somebody gets in office who's like, let's build a big wall and send all the people of color out of our country? Would you ever worry that that could affect some, like, because it is government money, right? It looks like 60–70% of it. Would you ever worry that that could really affect, donor-funded organizations like this?
Certainly. That's a big issue currently. It's I actually recently wrote an article for the Northwind about refugees and like stopping them from coming in. It would reflect very poorly on America to begin with, because we're such a big help to them. We've taken quite a few. I think I did the math. It was something like 15 to 20% of the world's refugees we were taking in up until I think 2014 or 15. And something like that would certainly like turn off private donors as well if they start seeing laws being made to prevent this service. They're going to see no use in providing any funds.
When's your article? Is it out right now?
It was a couple weeks ago.
Oh.
Well, the political rhetoric aside, I mean, I think there will be, in the future, as there is now, I think, there's more and more pressure on nonprofits to prove that they're doing what they say they're doing. And that's why I asked in terms of any type of feedback or data that's collected. I would think even anecdotal evidence, for example, if there were highly successful refugees that were helped by a nonprofit like World Relief, if they could be, let's say, used in a tasteful promotional sense, as case examples of where, this person came to this country, because frankly, a lot of our ancestors came to this country with virtually nothing, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that uncommon, it's just the circumstances in terms of how it happens. And, if there would be a way to collect data to document this, to show successful immigration, successful integration into our society, into our economy, I think that would be very powerful evidence in terms of service quality and the processes that an organization like this would have in place.
Yeah, I certainly agree. There are a lot of examples of that. There are a lot of refugees who went through college, and
Right.
when I was working in Nashville, there were many of the office employees, the caseworkers who were picking up refugees at the airport for bringing them to their homes, were former refugees who went through this whole process, got an education living in America, and then
Right.
came back to help more. But unfortunately, and nowhere that I looked was there any calculated information on that, which would be important.
I mean, I've read a lot. I mean, we're running out of time here, but I've read a lot in the last couple of years. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal. Who's the guy that started YouTube? Not YouTube, Facebook. So him and his wife basically have given away over their lifetime will have given away everything, And they've set it up in such a way that it's more of a profit kind of oriented approach. They're nonprofits, but they have to have some measurables, some metrics that demonstrate that they are doing good, for lack of a better term. If it doesn't work, then that nonprofit is not going to be funded. And it's a completely different way of thinking of nonprofits. You know, it's the idea that they're going to have to be held accountable in some form or some fashion. So, for example, using a nonprofit like this, could you measure, for instance, the amount of taxes paid, 10, 20 years down the road by successful immigrants, the amount of employment that they might have created, number of employees, etc. There could be a number of highly measurable outcomes that you could look at to demonstrate and say, heavens, yes, we clearly have had a positive impact, not just qualitatively, but quantitatively also. And you mark my words, I'm sure we're moving in that direction for a lot of nonprofits, So, any other, go ahead.
Which one?
The revenue side,
The grant or?
yeah, go for it then.
So you said it was 61 million in the most recent year.
In 2014.
Yeah. Do you have any, final comment, do you have any sense of how many refugees are helped? That's just in the U.S., 61 million?
Yes.
How many are helped?
I'm sorry, the total revenue was 61 million overall.
Globally?
Yes,
Okay.
$61 million.
How many how many refugees helped globally?
I think a couple tens of thousands.
Like 20,000?
Like 20, 30,000.
Okay, so,
To measure dollar per.
well,
Yeah, no, I think it's a good metric. It's just interesting to.
That's a,
so you're looking at basically
only way to do it.
a little over $2,000 per refugee. Now, I don't mean to sound crass, but that's a pretty small amount in the sense that if someone becomes a contributing, tax-paying member of society, it would be very easy to demonstrate, I think, over a reasonably short period of time that that's a very solid payback on that investment, on the part of this nonprofit. That's the point I'm making in terms of, it's not like these are huge sums of money being spent the way it sounds.
No, not at all.
It's really a very small amount of money. You think about $2,000 to help a family or help an individual, basically get started in a new country like the United States. So, all right, we're running out of time here. So, any other comments, questions? Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you.